The Zelrothi Empire had never known defeat. For 3,000 years, their crimson fleets had swept across the galaxy like a plague of fire, consuming worlds and civilizations with methodical precision. Their warriors stood 10 feet tall, their exoskeletons gleaming with biometallic armor that had evolved over millennia of conquest. Each Zelrothi possessed 4 arms ending in razor-sharp claws, and their faces bore the predatory features of apex hunters: elongated skulls, rows of needle-sharp teeth, and cold, calculating eyes that glowed amber in the dark. Admiral Zexthara stood on the bridge of the dreadnought Crimson Dominion, gazing at the star charts displaying their latest conquest. The Terran Federation had been marked for destruction 6 months ago, when their exploratory vessels had dared to cross into Zelrothi space. The humans had sent diplomatic envoys, speaking of peace and mutual cooperation. Zexthara had ordered them vaporized on sight. Peace was a concept for the weak, and the Zelrothi had not built their empire through weakness. "Status report," Zexthara commanded, his voice a rumbling growl that echoed through the bridge. His subordinates, each a battle-scarred veteran of countless campaigns, snapped to attention. "The human colonies on the Outer Rim have been eliminated, Admiral," reported Commander Valkan, his secondary arms manipulating holographic displays. 17 worlds cleansed, approximately 40 million humans exterminated. Their defensive capabilities were primitive. A satisfied purr emanated from Zexthara's throat. The humans had proven laughably weak compared to other species the Zelrothi had conquered. Their ships relied on crude chemical propulsion and nuclear weapons, technology the Empire had surpassed millennia ago. Their ground forces carried projectile weapons that barely scratched Zelrothi bioarmor. Most amusing of all, the humans seemed to value individual life, often retreating when faced with heavy casualties rather than fighting to the last breath. "Have we located their homeworld yet?" Zexthara asked, his claws clicking against the command console. "Yes, Admiral. Long-range scouts have identified a system called Sol, containing the primary human breeding world, Earth. Intelligence suggests it houses nearly 8 billion of the creatures. Our xenobiologists estimate we could harvest enough genetic material to fuel our bioforges for decades." Zexthara's mandibles clicked in approval. The Zelrothi Empire didn't simply destroy their enemies. They consumed them, literally and figuratively. Conquered species were either enslaved for labor or processed into biomatter to enhance Zelrothi technology. Human DNA, with its remarkable adaptability and genetic diversity, would prove valuable for creating new warrior breeds. "Excellent. How long before we can mount a full assault on this Earth?" "Our fleets are already in position, Admiral. We can begin the bombardment within 72 standard cycles." However, Velkin paused, his amber eyes flickering with uncertainty. "Speak. Our advanced scouts have reported some unusual readings from the inner system. There appears to be significant human activity around their star. Massive construction projects that our sensors cannot fully penetrate. Intelligence believes they may be attempting to build some form of defensive installations." Zexthara laughed, a harsh sound that resembled grinding metal. "Desperate creatures building monuments to their own doom. It matters not. Order the fleet to advance. I want to see this Earth burn with my own eyes." The Zelrothi war machine began its final approach toward humanity's birth world. 500 warships, each the size of a small city, moved through space with predatory grace. Their hulls were grown rather than built, organic curves of biometal that pulsed with dark energy. Weapon pods studded their surfaces like cancerous growths, each capable of reducing continents to glass. As the fleet entered the Sol system, Zexthara studied the tactical displays with growing amusement. The human defenses were even more pathetic than intelligence had suggested. A scattered handful of orbital platforms surrounded Earth, their energy signatures barely registering on Zelrothi sensors. Several space stations drifted in high orbit, clearly civilian structures hastily converted for military use. Most laughable of all, the humans had positioned their largest ships, primitive metal cylinders barely 2 kilometers long, in a defensive formation around their moon. "They mean to make a stand," observed Velkan. "Should we offer them the chance to surrender?" "No," Zexthara replied, his eyes gleaming with bloodlust. "Let them die with whatever honor their species can muster. Begin the bombardment." The first wave of Zelrathi vessels opened fire, sending torrents of plasma bolts toward the human defensive positions. The orbital platforms exploded like fireworks, their destruction visible from the planet's surface. The space stations, packed with civilians attempting to flee, disintegrated under concentrated fire. The human ships around the moon fought valiantly, but, briefly, their weapons barely scorched Zelrathi armor before they were vaporized in return. Within hours, Earth's outer defenses had been completely eliminated. The blue-green world hung defenseless in space, its cities glittering like scattered gems in the darkness. Zextara could see the massive population centers through his ship's sensors: New York, London, Tokyo, Mumbai, each containing millions of potential slaves or biomatter resources. "Commence planetary bombardment," he ordered. "Target population centers first. I want their governments to watch their species burn before we finish them." But, as the first salvo of plasma bolts streaked toward Earth's surface, something impossible happened. The space around the planet began to shimmer, as if reality itself was bending. Geometric patterns of light erupted from seemingly empty void, forming complex crystalline structures that intercepted the Zelrathi weapons. The plasma bolts, capable of melting through starship hulls, simply vanished upon contact with the mysterious barriers. "What sorcery is this?" Zextara snarled, his claws extending in rage. Before his crew could respond, the space around Earth erupted in brilliant flashes of light. Thousands of objects materialized from nowhere, ships unlike anything the Zelrathi had ever encountered. They were sleek and angular, composed of materials that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Their surfaces were smooth as black glass, broken only by thin lines of blue energy that pulsed like veins. "Admiral," Velkan's voice carried a note of uncertainty that Zextara had never heard before. "These vessels, they're not showing up on any of our databases. The technology appears to be far beyond anything we've encountered in 3 millennia of conquest." The mysterious ships moved with impossible grace, accelerating and turning in ways that defied the laws of physics as the Zelrathi understood them. They seemed to phase in and out of existence, appearing in one location only to instantly materialize somewhere else. Worst of all, they were emerging by the thousands. "Sir," a communications officer reported, his voice trembling. "We're receiving a transmission from the human homeworld. It's being broadcast on frequencies we didn't know existed." "Put it through," Zextara commanded, though every instinct told him he was about to hear something that would shatter his understanding of the universe. The main viewscreen flickered to life, displaying the image of a human female. She appeared unremarkable by Zelrathi standards, small, fragile, with the soft features typical of her species. But her eyes held a cold intelligence that made even the battle-hardened Admiral feel a chill of unease. "Greetings, Admiral Zextara of the Zelrathi Empire," the human said, her voice calm and measured. "My name is Director Sarah Chun of the Terran Defense Coalition. We've been expecting you." "Impossible," Zextara growled. "Our advance was undetected. Your species lacks the technology to track your movements across interstellar distances, to predict your invasion routes, to prepare adequate defenses." The human smiled, and there was something predatory in that expression that reminded Zextara uncomfortably of his own species. "Admiral, you've made several fundamental errors in your assessment of humanity. The greatest of which is assuming that the colonies you destroyed represented the full extent of our technological capabilities." The viewscreen split, showing tactical displays that made Zextara's blood run cold. The mysterious ships surrounding Earth weren't the extent of the human fleet. They were merely the vanguard. Sensor readings showed thousands more vessels emerging from what appeared to be artificial wormholes, their energy signatures unlike anything in known science. "You see," Director Chen continued, "those outer colonies you so easily conquered? They were established using technology from our early expansion period, roughly equivalent to your own capabilities from about 2,000 years ago. We found it useful to maintain the appearance of being a primitive species. It makes potential aggressors overconfident." Zextara's mind reeled as the implications hit him. If the human colonies had been using obsolete technology, then what were they facing now? The ships surrounding his fleet moved with casual ease that suggested their pilots weren't even trying. The energy barriers protecting Earth seemed to require no effort to maintain. "What are you?" he whispered, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. "We are what happens when a species spends 10,000 years developing in isolation," Chen replied. "While you conquered the galaxy through brute force, we explored the fundamental nature of reality itself. We learned to manipulate space and time, to harvest energy from quantum fluctuations, to build machines that operate on principles your science hasn't discovered yet." The tactical display showed Zel'Rothi ships beginning to retreat, but the human vessels followed effortlessly. Zextara watched in horror as his most advanced dreadnoughts, ships that had reduced entire civilizations to ash, were disabled by weapons that seemed to simply turn off their biomechanical systems. Crews reported that their vessels' organic components were dying, their weapons powering down, their life support systems failing. "The truly tragic irony," Chen observed, "is that we would have been happy to coexist peacefully. Your species could have learned from us, grown beyond your current limitations. Instead, you chose genocide. You cannot defeat the Empire." Zextara roared, though his confidence was cracking. "We have conquered 1,000 worlds. Our fleets number in the millions. And every one of those fleets is being dealt with as we speak," Chen said calmly. The view screen now showed a galactic map with red dots representing Zel'Rothi forces. As Zextara watched in stunned disbelief, the dots began winking out one by one. "You see, Admiral, the moment you entered our space 6 months ago, we began tracking every ship in your empire. We know the location of every world you control, every resource depot, every breeding facility." The human's eyes grew cold as winter space. "We gave you every opportunity to reconsider your aggression. We sent diplomats offering peace. You murdered them. We attempted to withdraw our colonies from disputed territories. You pursued and slaughtered civilians. You have shown us exactly what your species represents, a cancer that consumes everything it touches." Zextara felt fear, an emotion he had not experienced since childhood. Around him, his crew stared at their instruments in growing panic as reports flooded in from across the Empire. Their fleets were being systematically destroyed or disabled. Their homeworlds were under attack by forces that seemed to materialize from thin air. "Please," he found himself saying, the word foreign on his tongue. "Mercy. We can negotiate terms. Reparations for the colonies we—" "Admiral," Chun interrupted gently. "Do you remember what you told our diplomats when they begged for peace?" The words came back to him like a physical blow. He had personally delivered the message to the human envoys before ordering their execution. The Zel'Rothi Empire does not negotiate with inferior species. Submit or perish. "Yes," Chen said, reading his expression. "I thought you might recall that. Consider this your species' education in the concept of consequences." The last thing Admiral Zextara saw was a flash of brilliant blue light as his flagship's biosystems shut down completely. The mighty dreadnought that had spearheaded countless conquests drifted powerless in space, its crew slowly suffocating as life support failed. Around Earth, the remnants of the Zel'Rothi invasion force surrendered unconditionally. The survivors would be taken to detention facilities where they would spend their remaining lives contemplating the hubris that had led their empire to attempt the conquest of a species that had transcended their understanding of science itself. Director Chen stood in her command center, watching the tactical displays as the last Zel'Rothi holdouts across the galaxy were neutralized. The operation had taken exactly 17 hours and 32 minutes, longer than anticipated, but still within acceptable parameters. "Ma'am," her aide approached carefully, "we're receiving surrender requests from 47 former Zel'Rothi client species. They're asking for protection and offering to provide intelligence on Empire operations." "Grant them protectorate status," Chen replied. "Begin humanitarian aid operations for any species currently under Zel'Rothi occupation. And prepare the historical archives. We'll need to document exactly what happened here for future reference." As she spoke, more human vessels continued emerging from the quantum tunnels that connected their hidden bases throughout the galaxy. The Terran Defense Coalition had spent centuries preparing for this moment, knowing that eventually their expanding civilization would encounter aggressive species that couldn't be reasoned with. The Zel'Rothi had believed victory was theirs when they saw primitive human colonies offering no resistance. They had no way of knowing that they were attacking the equivalent of historical reenactment sites, places where humans maintained pre-technological societies for cultural and research purposes. Now the galaxy would learn what humanity had become during its long isolation. They were no longer the species that had crawled up from gravity wells using chemical rockets. They had evolved into something that could reshape reality itself, and they had just announced their presence to the universe in the most unmistakable way possible. The age of Zelrothi dominance was over. The age of humanity had begun. 3 months after the fall of the Zelrothi Empire, the galaxy trembled with uncertainty. Word of humanity's devastating counterattack had spread through trade routes and communication networks faster than wildfire. Species that had cowered under Zelrothi rule for millennia suddenly found themselves free, while others who had allied with the Empire faced an uncertain future. On the world of Kethvara, capital of the Hegemony Coalition, Supreme Chancellor Vorthak paced the length of his crystalline war room. The mantis-like being's compound eyes reflected the holographic displays showing the collapse of galactic power structures. For 800 years, the hegemony had maintained its position as the galaxy's second greatest military force by carefully avoiding direct conflict with the Zelrothi while expanding into territories the Empire deemed worthless. Now everything had changed. Intelligence assessment. Vorthak clicked to his aide, a smaller Kethvari whose carapace bore the scars of countless battles. How accurate are these reports about human capabilities? Confirmed through multiple independent sources, Chancellor. The aide replied, mandibles clicking nervously. The humans designated 17 different star systems as simultaneous attack vectors. Their forces materialized simultaneously across 43 sectors of space. Conservative estimates suggest they deployed over 1 million vessels in coordinated strikes that lasted less than 20 hours. Vorthak's antennae twitched, a sign of extreme agitation among his species. The hegemony's entire fleet numbered perhaps 30,000 ships, accumulated over centuries of careful expansion and technological development. The humans had deployed 30 times that number in a single engagement, using technology that defied conventional understanding of physics. What do we know about their actual capabilities? Strip away the fear and hyperbole. Give me facts. The aide manipulated the holographic displays, showing captured sensor readings from surviving Zelrothi vessels. Their ships appear to utilize some form of instantaneous transportation, not hyperspace jumps, but actual teleportation. Energy signatures suggest they're drawing power from sources we cannot identify. Most disturbing, they demonstrated the ability to selectively shut down biomechanical systems without affecting purely mechanical components. Explaining how they disabled Zelrothi vessels without destroying them, Vorthak mused. They wanted prisoners, not corpses. The question is, why? Before his aide could respond, the chamber's communication array activated. A shimmering portal of blue light materialized in the center of the room, and through it stepped a human figure. Vorthak's warrior instincts kicked in. His 4 arms reached for weapons while his armored carapace began shifting into combat configuration. The human raised one hand in what appeared to be a peaceful gesture. She was tall for her species, dressed in a simple black uniform that seemed to absorb light. Her face bore the calm expression of someone accustomed to being the most dangerous entity in any room. Supreme Chancellor Vorthak, she said, her voice carrying easily through the vast chamber. I am Ambassador Elena Vasquez of the Terran Diplomatic Corps. Please, don't be alarmed by my method of arrival. We've found that personal meetings tend to be more productive than long-distance communications. Vorthak's security detail burst through the chamber doors, weapons trained on the intruder. The human ignored them completely, her attention focused solely on the Chancellor. How did you penetrate our defenses? Vorthak demanded, though he kept his weapons lowered. If this human could appear in his most secure facility at will, resistance would likely prove futile. Your defenses are quite impressive, Vasquez replied diplomatically. Unfortunately, they're designed to stop conventional intrusion methods. We don't use conventional methods. She gestured to a small device on her wrist. This allows me to step through space-time itself. Think of it as walking through doorways that exist in dimensions your sensors can't detect. Vorthak felt a chill that had nothing to do with the chamber's temperature controls. The casual way she described technology that seemed like magic suggested that humans viewed their impossible abilities as mundane tools. "Why are you here?" he asked, waving his security detail back, while maintaining a defensive posture. "The Hegemony Coalition controls approximately 15% of the galaxy's inhabited systems," Vasquez stated, consulting a device that projected holographic star charts into the air between them. "Your territory includes the homeworlds of 47 different species, most of whom joined your alliance voluntarily. You maintain generally peaceful relations with your neighbors and have never engaged in systematic genocide. Unlike the Zelrathi," Vorthak observed. "Exactly. Which is why you're receiving a diplomatic visit rather than a military intervention." Vasquez smiled, and Vorthak noticed that her canine teeth were slightly pronounced, a reminder that humans were evolved predators despite their deceptively fragile appearance. "The Terran Council has decided to establish formal diplomatic relations with stable galactic powers. We're offering the hegemony a choice: peaceful coexistence under a new galactic framework, or—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Vorthak's compound eyes studied the human carefully. She stood relaxed, showing no sign of the tension that should accompany such a momentous negotiation. Her confidence suggested that regardless of his answer, the outcome was already predetermined. "What does this galactic framework entail?" "An end to territorial expansion through military conquest. Establishment of trade protocols that prevent economic exploitation of developing species. Mandatory mediation for territorial disputes. Most importantly, an absolute prohibition on genocide, slavery, or systematic oppression." "And if we refuse?" Vasquez tilted her head slightly. "Chancellor, 6 hours ago, the Andromedan Collective announced their intention to claim former Zelrathi territories through military force. They deployed their entire battle fleet, nearly 80,000 ships, to establish occupation zones around strategic worlds." Vorthak's antennae went rigid. The Andromedans were notorious for their aggressive expansion and brutal treatment of conquered populations. If they claimed the power vacuum left by the Zelrathi collapse, what happened to their fleet? He asked, though he suspected he already knew. They were politely asked to return to their own territory. When they declined, their ships were disabled and towed to a processing facility in the Outer Rim. The crews are being held as prisoners of war pending negotiations for their release. 80,000 ships, Vorthak whispered. Disabled in how long? 37 minutes. The Chancellor's legs nearly gave out beneath him. 80,000 ships, enough firepower to conquer half the galaxy, neutralized in less than an hour. The implications were staggering. "You could conquer every species in the galaxy within weeks," he stated. "Yes," Vasquez agreed simply. "But conquest has never been our goal. We prefer cooperation to domination. However, we will not tolerate aggression against peaceful species or attempts to fill the power vacuum left by the Zelrathi Empire." She manipulated her wrist device, causing new holographic displays to appear around them. The images showed human vessels, thousands upon thousands of them, positioning themselves at strategic points throughout the galaxy. They moved with the casual precision of gardeners tending to plants, rather than conquerors claiming territory. Every major trade route, every strategic choke point, every former Zelrathi stronghold is now under Terran observation, Vasquez explained. "We're not claiming sovereignty over these areas, but we will prevent any species from using them to launch campaigns of conquest." Vorthak studied the deployment patterns with growing awe. The humans had essentially locked down the galaxy's military infrastructure overnight. Any attempt at large-scale warfare would require moving through territories they controlled. "You've imposed peace through overwhelming force," he realized. "We've imposed stability through strategic positioning," Vasquez corrected. "Peace will come through negotiation and mutual cooperation." But, yes, force was necessary to create the conditions where peaceful solutions become possible. The Chancellor's aide approached cautiously, whispering urgent reports into his audio receptors. Vorthak's expression grew increasingly troubled as he processed the information. "What is it?" Vasquez asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. "Reports from across the galaxy. The Nexus Accord is mobilizing its fleets in preparation for territorial claims. The Silicon hierarchy has begun constructing military installations in neutral zones. The Void Seekers have resumed their raiding operations against civilian shipping lanes." "All predictable responses," Vasquez nodded. "Former Zelrathi client species are panicking, wondering if they'll face retribution for their collaboration. Independent powers are attempting to seize territory, while they believe humans are still consolidating our position. Pirates and raiders think the collapse of imperial authority means open season on helpless targets. She touched her wrist device again, and, suddenly, the chamber was filled with dozens of additional holographic displays showing military movements across the galaxy. Fleets mobilizing, armies marching, weapons being activated on dozens of worlds. The next 72 hours will determine whether this transition occurs peacefully or requires more direct intervention, Vasquez continued. The Terran Council is hoping that responsible leaders like yourself will help stabilize the situation through cooperation rather than force us to impose order unilaterally. Vorthak studied the displays, his strategic mind rapidly processing the implications. The galaxy was indeed on the brink of chaos as every major power attempted to capitalize on the Zelrothi collapse. Without intervention, the resulting wars could last for centuries and cost billions of lives. What exactly are you proposing? Joint enforcement of the new galactic framework. The hegemony has an excellent reputation for fair treatment of member species and effective peacekeeping operations. We'd like your forces to work alongside ours in maintaining stability during the transition period. And in exchange, guaranteed territorial integrity for all current hegemony worlds. Preferential trade status with human colonies. Access to selected technological innovations that could improve quality of life for your citizens without disrupting your cultural development. Vorthak's mind raced. The offer was extraordinarily generous, too generous for a standard diplomatic agreement. The humans were offering partnership rather than demanding submission, despite possessing the power to simply impose their will. Why offer us anything at all? You could simply announce your intentions and enforce them through superior firepower. Vasquez smiled again, and this time it seemed genuinely warm rather than predatory. Chancellor, humanity spent 10,000 years developing in relative isolation. During that time, we learned some hard lessons about the dangers of unchecked power and the importance of diverse perspectives. She gestured to the holographic displays showing human forces throughout the galaxy. Yes, we have the technological capability to impose our will through force. But sustainable peace requires legitimacy, not just power. We need partners who understand local conditions, who have relationships with regional species, who can provide perspectives we lack. You're offering us the role of junior partners in galactic governance, Vorthak realized. We're offering you the role of equals in galactic peacekeeping, Vasquez corrected. The universe is vast and complex. No single species, no matter how advanced, should have sole authority over the fate of others. The Chancellor's aide approached again, this time with even more urgent reports. Vorthak's expression grew grim as he processed the new information. The situation is deteriorating rapidly, he informed Vasquez. The Silicon hierarchy has launched preemptive strikes against former Zelrothi outposts. The Nexus Accord is mobilizing for a full-scale invasion of the core worlds. Multiple pirate fleets are converging on refugee convoy routes. Then, we need an answer, Chancellor. Will the hegemony help us maintain order, or will we be forced to act alone? Vorthak looked around his war room, seeing the faces of his advisors and security personnel. All of them were waiting for his decision, a choice that would determine not just the fate of the hegemony, but quite possibly the future of galactic civilization. The practical considerations were clear. Humanity possessed overwhelming technological superiority and had demonstrated both the willingness and ability to use it. Resistance would be futile and potentially suicidal. But, beyond mere survival, the humans were offering something unprecedented, partnership instead of subjugation. The Hegemony Coalition accepts your proposal, Vorthak announced formally. Our fleets will coordinate with Terran forces to maintain stability during the transition period. However, I have one condition. Yes, any use of force must be proportional and targeted. We will not participate in campaigns that result in unnecessary civilian casualties or the destruction of cultural heritage sites. Agreed completely, Vasquez replied immediately. Our rules of engagement are actually more restrictive than what you've outlined. We prefer to disable and capture rather than destroy whenever possible. She extended her hand in what Vorthak recognized as a human gesture of agreement. After a moment's hesitation, he reached out with one of his own arms to complete the gesture. "Chancellor," Vasquez said as they shook hands, "you've just helped prevent a galactic war. The next few days will be challenging, but together we can ensure that the Zelrathi Empire's collapse leads to lasting peace rather than endless conflict." As she spoke, alerts began sounding throughout the chamber. The displays showed hegemony fleets across their territory beginning to coordinate with human vessels, their movements synchronized through communication channels that operated faster than light itself. In the depths of space, human ships began materializing around hostile fleets that had been preparing to claim territory through force. The message was clear: the galaxy's new guardians were watching, and they would not tolerate aggression against peaceful worlds. The second phase of humanity's emergence onto the galactic stage had begun. Where the first had demonstrated their power, this one would establish their commitment to using that power responsibly. But for species still contemplating resistance, the lesson was becoming increasingly clear. The age of conquest through military might was ending, whether they accepted it willingly or not. 1 year had passed since the Zelrathi Empire's destruction, and the galaxy had settled into an uneasy stability. The Terran Council's peacekeeping efforts had prevented the massive wars that many predicted would follow the Empire's collapse. But not everyone had accepted the new order willingly. Deep in the void reaches, beyond the spiral arms where civilized species dared to venture, an ancient intelligence stirred. The Harbingers had slumbered for millennia, waiting for the galaxy to evolve enough to be worthy of their attention. They were older than recorded history, survivors of cosmic cycles that had seen entire galactic civilizations rise and fall like waves on a beach. The entity known as Prime Harbinger Zendrath existed partially outside normal space-time, its consciousness spanning dimensions that lesser beings couldn't perceive. When the psychic shockwave of the Zelrathi Empire's instantaneous destruction reached its awareness, Zendrath awakened with something resembling interest. For the first time in 50,000 years, something significant had occurred in this unremarkable spiral galaxy. Zendrath's investigation revealed the emergence of a species that wielded technology bordering on the transcendent. These humans had somehow developed capabilities that approached those the Harbingers had possessed at the height of their civilization. More intriguingly, they had done so without exhibiting the typical signs of technological ascension: the abandonment of physical form, the retreat from material concerns, the eventual self-destruction that marked every other species that had reached such heights. This warranted personal attention. The Harbinger fleet began its journey toward human space, not traveling through normal space, but sliding between dimensional barriers that allowed them to bypass the tedious limitations of physics. Each Harbinger vessel was less a ship than a fragment of controlled reality, capable of reshaping local space-time according to the will of its occupants. As they approached the galaxy's inhabited regions, their presence began affecting nearby star systems in subtle but profound ways. Planets experienced minor gravitational fluctuations. Stellar radiation patterns shifted slightly. Most disturbing of all, psychically sensitive species across dozens of worlds began reporting the same recurring nightmare: vast shadows moving between the stars, searching for something that would determine the fate of all life in the galaxy. On Earth, Dr. Sarah Chun sat in her office within the Terran Defense Command, reviewing reports from across human space. The transition to galactic governance was proceeding better than anyone had dared hope. Former Zelrathi territories were being integrated into the new framework with minimal resistance. Trade routes were flourishing under the protection of joint peacekeeping fleets. Several species had voluntarily requested admission to the expanded Terran Confederation. But the reports spreading across her desk carried a different message. Astronomical observatories throughout human space were detecting gravitational anomalies in uninhabited sectors. Deep space monitoring stations reported energy signatures that defied conventional explanation. Most concerning, the Psychic Research Division was documenting a sharp increase in prophetic dreams and visions among sensitive individuals. "Ma'am," her aide, Lieutenant Commander Torres, approached with obvious concern. "We're receiving priority communications from the Hegemony Coalition, the Reformed Nexus Accord, and 17 independent systems. They're all reporting the same phenomena: unexplained gravitational disturbances and widespread psychological episodes among their psychic populations. Chun felt a familiar chill, the same sensation she'd experienced years ago when humanity's deep space sensors had first detected the approaching Zelrothi fleet. Something was coming, and it was far more significant than any previous threat they'd faced. Have our dimensional physicists made any progress analyzing the anomalies? She asked. Yes, ma'am, but you're not going to like their conclusions. Dr. Krishnamurti believes the disturbances are caused by entities moving through higher dimensional space, essentially traveling through dimensions that normal matter can't access. The energy requirements would be. Torres consulted his tablet. He used the phrase cosmically absurd in his official report. Chin stood and walked to the window overlooking Earth's sprawling capital complex. In the distance, she could see the massive quantum fabrication facilities that produced the components for human starships, and, beyond them, the dimensional research stations where humanity's greatest minds worked to understand the fundamental nature of reality. All of it seemed suddenly fragile in the face of whatever was approaching. Contact the other members of the Peacekeeping Council, she ordered. Emergency session in 2 hours. And activate the deep space sensor networks, all of them. I want to know everything about these entities before they reach inhabited space. 2 days later, the first Harbinger vessel materialized at the edge of the Sol system. It didn't emerge from hyperspace or drop out of faster-than-light travel. It simply became present, as if it had always existed in that location and reality had only just noticed. The ship defied easy description. Its surface seemed to shift between different materials, sometimes metallic, sometimes crystalline, occasionally appearing to be made of compressed space itself. It measured roughly 15 kilometers in length, but sensor readings suggested its internal volume was significantly larger than its external dimensions should allow. The Terran Defense Fleet responded immediately, with over 200 vessels converging on the intruder's position. Admiral Martinez, commanding the operation from the flagship Terra Nova, established a defensive perimeter while attempting to communicate with the unknown craft. Unknown vessel, you have entered Terran space without authorization. Please state your intentions and prepare to be escorted to a diplomatic facility. The response came not through conventional communication channels, but as a direct psychic transmission that reached every human consciousness in the solar system simultaneously. It was a voice like the grinding of tectonic plates, carrying overtones of cosmic age and barely contained power. Greetings, children of Terra. I am Prime Harbinger Zendrath, speaker for the first ones who shaped the cosmos before your star was born. We have come to evaluate your species for inclusion in the greater hierarchy. On Earth, emergency sessions convened in every government facility as humanity grappled with the implications of first contact with entities that claimed to predate their entire solar system. Dr. Chin found herself once again coordinating humanity's response to an existential threat, but this time the stakes felt infinitely higher. What do we know about these harbingers? She asked the assembled experts in the secure briefing room beneath Terran Command. Dr. Elena Vasquez, who had transitioned from diplomatic service to xenoarchaeological research, presented her findings. Cross-referencing with data recovered from Zelrothi archives and intelligence gathered from other species, we've identified fragmentary references to ancient entities that periodically evaluate younger civilizations. The details are vague, but every reference carries implications of cosmic-scale consequences for species that fail their assessment. What kind of assessment? Chen asked, though she suspected she wouldn't like the answer. Unknown. The few species that claim to have encountered harbingers before describe tests that examine not just technological capability, but fundamental aspects of consciousness, morality, and evolutionary potential. Failure apparently results in. Vasquez paused uncomfortably. Total erasure. Not just destruction, complete removal from existence, as if the species never existed at all. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. They weren't facing potential conquest or even extinction in the conventional sense. They were facing judgment from entities that could retroactively erase humanity from history. Have we made any progress establishing communication protocols? Chen asked. Admiral Martinez's voice crackled through the secure communication link from the fleet. The entity claims it will speak only with humanity's true representatives, whatever that means. It's requested a meeting with individuals who embody your species' highest achievements in consciousness evolution. Consciousness evolution? Chen frowned. What does that even mean? Before anyone could respond, the psychic transmission returned, this time focused specifically on the briefing room. The sensation of an alien mind touching theirs was overwhelming, like trying to contain an ocean of consciousness within a teacup. Dr. Sarah Chan. The voice resonated through their thoughts. You will serve as humanity's advocate in the evaluation process. Your species' fate will be determined by how well you represent their potential for transcendence. I don't understand, Chen replied aloud, hoping the entity could perceive her words. What exactly are you evaluating us for? The greater hierarchy encompasses those species that have evolved beyond the limitations of material existence, civilizations that have learned to shape reality through will rather than technology. Your species displays technology that approaches our own capabilities, yet you remain bound to physical forms and material concerns. This presents an interesting paradox. The alien presence intensified, and Chun felt as if her entire consciousness was being examined under a microscope. We must determine whether humanity possesses the wisdom to wield cosmic power responsibly, or whether you will follow the path of destruction that claimed so many who came before you. And if we fail this evaluation, then your species will be prevented from ascending to true cosmic significance. Your existence will be adjusted to prevent future complications. Chen felt the blood drain from her face. The euphemistic language couldn't disguise the threat. Failure meant extinction so complete that humanity would be erased from the timeline itself. What does this evaluation entail? She asked. You will be taken aboard our vessel and subjected to trials that will reveal the true nature of your species' consciousness. Your responses will determine whether humanity is permitted to continue its current trajectory or whether intervention is required. Dr. Vasquez leaned forward. Intervention? What kind of intervention? Species that develop cosmic-level technology without corresponding wisdom have historically become threats to universal stability. If humanity is deemed unready for transcendence, we will reduce your civilization to a more manageable state, perhaps returning you to pre-industrial technological levels until sufficient evolutionary time has passed. The implications were staggering. These entities possess the power to essentially reset human civilization, stripping away millennia of advancement with casual ease. Worse, they seemed to view this as a routine housekeeping measure. Chen stood slowly, her mind racing through possibilities. Humanity's greatest achievement had been developing incredible technology while maintaining their essential humanity. If these harbingers measured advancement purely in terms of consciousness evolution, they might view humanity's retention of physical form and emotional connections as primitive limitations. I'll submit to your evaluation, she announced, causing gasps of alarm from her colleagues. But I want assurances that humanity won't be judged solely by my individual performance. Your species will stand or fall based on whether you can demonstrate that biological consciousness can achieve transcendence without abandoning compassion, Zindrath replied. This is a test that no species has successfully passed in the history of our observations. The alien presence withdrew suddenly, leaving the humans feeling strangely hollow in its absence. Within minutes, reports flooded in that a transport beam had taken Dr. Chen from the briefing room, whisking her away to the Harbinger vessel. Aboard the impossible ship, Chen found herself in a space that hurt to perceive directly. Walls, floors, and ceilings seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, creating geometric patterns that her human mind couldn't fully process. The air itself hummed with energies that made her consciousness feel expanded and vulnerable at the same time. Zindrath materialized before her, or perhaps her perception was adjusted to allow her to see it. The entity appeared as a vaguely humanoid figure composed of shifting starlight and cosmic darkness, its features constantly flowing between different configurations. The evaluation begins, it announced. You will experience scenarios that reveal the fundamental nature of your species' relationship with power, responsibility, and transcendence. Remember, your responses will determine not just humanity's fate, but the fate of every species you have sworn to protect. The space around Chun began to shift and change, reality bending to create the first of what she suspected would be many impossible tests. As the trial began, she held on to one thought. Humanity had surprised the galaxy before with their hidden capabilities. Perhaps they could surprise these cosmic judges as well. The greatest challenge humanity had ever faced was about to begin, and it would be fought not with technology or weapons, but with the fundamental question of what it meant to be human in a universe where gods walked among the stars.